There's a particular kind of restlessness that doesn't announce itself all at once. It arrives quietly in the middle of meetings, on the drive home, somewhere between I should be grateful and something feels off. It's not a crisis, it's not a breakdown. It's more like a knowing that keeps showing up whether you invite it or not. For most people, that feeling goes unanswered, not because they're afraid of change, but because they don't yet have the language for what's shifting. They don't know how to move towards something new without feeling like they're dismantling everything they've built. Today's guest has spent a better part of her career helping people find that language. Jenny Blake is a former Google Career Development Program Manager turned author, speaker, and entrepreneur. Her book, Pivot, gave thousands of people a framework for navigating career transitions without starting from scratch. But what gets talked about less, and what we're going to speak about today, is the identity work that lives underneath the framework, the grief, the uncertainty, the quiet process of becoming someone you couldn't fully see yet. This conversation is about that, about what it actually feels like to pivot, not to just what it looks like from the outside, about the internal signals we either listen to or ignore, about how to evolve without erasing yourself. Jenny, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I'm delighted to be here. And I think that the identity piece that you specifically focus on is so essential and so overlooked amidst all the conversation about career change and pivots. And there's also a lot of grief. And I know you've touched on that too. So I'm really honored and delighted to be able to get into these aspects of change today.
Well, thank you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation because I do think it is a space that isn't spoken about. And grief isn't acknowledged in the space of identity shifts and changes. And so I'd love to just start at the beginning. So before you evolved and you pivoted into becoming an entrepreneur and a speaker and an author, can you talk a little bit about the beginning of your journey?
Well, I didn't have the language for it at the time, but my first kind of abrupt identity shifting pivot was came the start of my junior year at UCLA. I was studying political science communications, and one of my professors, as a result of doing research with her, invited me to come work at a startup back home where I'm from in Palo Alto as the first employee. And I said yes. It just felt like a great opportunity. They were going to be trying to move political polling online, which of course was ahead of the game because this was 2004. And I knew it was a great learning opportunity. But right there, all of a sudden, I was catapulted into adulting, trying to figure out how to be an employee, how to save money, how to live on my own, how to pay bills, all the things, and how to
Yeah.
even do a job, a full-time job. I had no clue what that would be like. And my friends were still in school partying and taking finals, and I felt a little bit out on an island. And because I was still young, I was like 19, I kind of felt lonely in that process. So ultimately, it's what led me to setting up my first website, Life After College, in 2005. But looking back through the lens of this conversation, there was grief around feeling left out. I wasn't really invited to any of the graduation events and vacations that happened the following spring when I went back to finish. And to this day, I'm not really in touch with my college friends the same way I am with Googlers, let's say, where I worked for 5 years, whereas I was only in school for 3.5 years. So there was grief around what I was giving up. Even at the same time that it was exciting and working at that startup launched my career. I mean, the startup for 2 years is how I got the job at Google, which then became this like cornerstone, next part of my identity, working for the big, sexy tech brand. Um, so yeah, thanks for asking about the beginning. I've never really spoken about it in this light before around the identity pieces of it.
But I really appreciate you bringing a voice to that because we talk a lot about grief around loss. Typically as it relates to loss of a person or a relationship, but you experienced loss of identity. You were a college student that, you were the same age, but had completely different life experiences. And I think it's really impactful that we are able to acknowledge that grief and identity can live simultaneously.
I love what Stephen Gross writes in The Examined Life. I quote him in Pivot. He said, "All change involves loss."
Oh,
And that even when we choose change and it's really positive and exciting, like for me, taking that first job opportunity, when I later pivoted to Google 2 years later after hitting a plateau at the startup, those were changes I initiated, and still they involved loss. They involved shedding something good in the hopes of finding something that was an even better fit. But that's part of the risk of change as well. You don't always know. And you've talked about this much more on your show, but just the like why as humans we find it so difficult to shed these layers of our identity as we change, I think is quite fascinating. And it's understandable. The way that our society works now with social media, how we're all in this global marketplace where we see what everyone else is doing all the time, the damn
yep.
time, that there is almost a premium on status of some kind, a way to stand out in some way. How could we not identify with like something, anything that could make us feel like we kind of have some purchase in the world? And when you lose that, it's terrifying and disorienting. And especially as it relates to career change, which is often tied to money,
Yep.
AKA our ability to provide for ourselves, our most fundamental needs, food, clothing, and shelter. It's totally terrifying. And then here in the US, where full-time work is directly associated with healthcare, any kind of job loss is incredibly jarring just from a logistical standpoint. And for me now, I've been self-employed for 15 years. And at times, as the breadwinner for me and my husband, I'll pay up to $2,000 a month for absolutely garbage health insurance, where a normal doctor visit is still $300, just to do routine blood work or something. So I think all of that to say, I understand why it's so existentially terrifying making career changes, because there truly is so much tied up in it. And it can be just so scary. It's like climbing the roller coaster before you see what is going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
Just that anxiety of uncertainty is so normal and so human and so expected. I can't imagine not experiencing it.
And I think, but you're absolutely right, though. And I think as a society, it's not only tied to the basic needs, right, of like food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, but whenever you meet someone, and this was a conversation I had with another guest on the podcast, was when I meet someone new, my first inclination to say, well, what do you do? And I'm not asking their hobbies. I'm not asking what they like to do in their free time. It's like, well, what do you do for work? Which directly equates to your money and, not so many words. But I think we as a society are just ingrained to have that identity of career or work with who you are. And then making that shift, whether it's purposeful or not, it still comes with this sense of grief and anxiety, to your point.
Yeah, and then it's also, what do you do sometimes if you feel happy with what you're doing, you're excited to answer, and then if not, you're kind of, this is hard to even answer sometimes answering that honestly. Like, how are you? Or what do you do? Those, it's like, do you give the, Martha Beck calls it your social self, and then we have an essential self. And sometimes, I mean, the last 6 years for me were really tricky, because when the pandemic hit in the first 2 weeks, I lost 80% of my scheduled income for the year as a keynote speaker. I'm part of live events, and even big licensing contracts from companies were really at risk because everything was changing and they were starting to clamp down on their budgets, which honestly has barely let up now, 6 years in. And I just stopped knowing what to even say. What do you do? It's like, well, I used to do this. Like,
Yep.
and I would sort of joke in a not haha lol, not actually kidding way of like, well, I used to be a keynote speaker, but those have all but dried up. That was then the story for 5 years. I could only see the loss. And yes, I did initiate new projects, like a couple years into the pandemic, when I just couldn't stand. I had like a six-figure licensing contract, and after 8 years, which put a whole another part of my income. Like, it was just really, really hard to keep my finances afloat. And so I started writing a blog called Rolling in Dough, DOH with a face palm. And when people asked, what do? I would just say, oh, well, lately I've been writing about how hard it is, the stickier sides of self-employment at this Substack. And it wasn't really what I did, but it was the thing I was doing that was bringing me solace. It was how I was working through the grief of all this loss. And I found that writing about the shadow sides of change, I even joked I was in my flop era, that I'm going to start a university class called Flopology. And Flopology would study things like grief, regret, ambiguous loss, ambiguous grief that you can't really name. It doesn't feel as worthy or as serious, like as a cancer diagnosis, for example, that you've been through. Um, I found that not everybody wanted me to write about these topics. They would prefer me just being sort of shiny and optimistic. But at a certain point,
Yeah.
that felt fake. I could no longer, like, in a way, you mentioned my second book, Pivot. I was really lucky. That launched in 2016. No one was talking about career pivots. I was able to sort of create and ride this wave, and the economy was booming. And so for the first 11 years of my self-employment, whatever I was doing that was working was also coinciding with a really robust economy. And so, um, I think people got used to me and I got used to myself as someone who had some answers and could give advice and could be helpful. And by 2023, that was gone. I just didn't have it in me anymore. I just thought, what do I know? I'm flailing. I'm in my flop era. I got nothing. All I can share is my story. I'm so done trying to even tie it into pretty bows. I give up. Like, that was another sort of like pivotal moment in my journey where I actually needed to take a step back from even pretending that. I mean, I didn't think I was pretending I had it all figured out, but now I was really effing sure I don't have anything figured out.
And I think that honesty, right? Because you were riding success for so long, and then all of a sudden, circumstances completely outside of your control strip that away from you, and sounds like a lot of self reflection, and I love the fact that you can bring a different lens to that ambiguous grief, right? Because and that was something that I struggled with a lot and I still struggle with. Oh, well, my journey or my challenges aren't as hard as yours, going through cancer. I'm like, but still, no, no, no. They're completely different. Like I hear that you are struggling with whatever it might be. And while we have different journeys and different experiences, your feelings are still valid. But it's true. I think, again, we just have trouble having those types of conversations and bringing and acknowledging it because we do want everything that your social self. We do want people just to bring their social self and not go any deeper.
Yet it felt like, oh, there's also comparative suffering, that is not that helpful that you're kind of mentioning, where I would think, oh, well, I'm still so lucky to be self-employed, or, well, I'm still so lucky that I had these clients at all. But as speaking of the grief process, there was no grief around like what happens when you lose your biggest client. I ended up
Yep.
doing a podcast compilation series on free time called, what is it called? Like, what happens when you lose your big gorilla client? It was something like that. And I had other small business owners submit their responses because when I searched for that topic in Spotify, nothing came up, no other podcasts. I'm like, what do you do when you lose your biggest client, your big beloved? And I know as a business owner, I know I'm not entitled to any client staying with me or saying yes to a proposal. I knew that intellectually, but in my heart, I was devastated. Like it was so hard for me to just replace 6 figures of income overnight. And um, there was no process and no conversation around all the many small losses. It was like,
Sure.
no one was the end of the world. There's so many other people were suffering so much more in the pandemic. And I'm always aware of what's happening, like war and famine and tragedy at other parts around the world. So it was really, really hard for me to give myself any permission at all to give air to what the hard stuff, like again, especially on that Rolling in Dough Substack, because that was really what became my outlet. And the only thing that tipped me over the edge, I call it 51-49, like 49% unsure, anxious, insecure. And the 51 was, but maybe there are other small business owners like me, and this is what they need to hear. And if nothing else, they will feel less alone. I just felt like that's the one and only thing that I have to offer right now is to help put words to this experience for whatever they're going through too. And it doesn't negate anyone else's suffering in any way. It's just to say, here's what this little crevice looks like. And to mix metaphors, they say, don't write from the wound, write from the scar. I wanted to say what what the wound felt like. It's like, I
Mm,
don't want, even now in 2026, I would have a hard time telling you exactly what I was feeling. And I was publishing those essays twice a week for 2.5 years. Part of
wow.
me knew I shouldn't publish from the wound, only when it's like a shiny healed scar. But the other part of me felt like, yeah, but nobody's talking about what the wound feels like. So why don't I just talk about it while it's here, even though I don't have solutions? Because I know I'm going to forget. And I absolutely would forget now that I have a little kind of different momentum on the other side.
Absolutely. I mean, time, what's the phrase? Time heals all wounds, right? But still you need to be able to bring a voice to how it felt in that moment. And the fact that you took your experience to and changed it or transformed it into something to help others feel not quite as alone is so incredibly powerful because everyone's going through it, through something. But the fact that you were so vulnerable in sharing your experience and your story, I just want to acknowledge. I think that's incredibly powerful. The fact that you were so open,
Thank you.
and trying to give voice to others who may not have the words to be able to express how they're feeling in that moment of being in the wound as opposed to having a nicely healed scar.
Yeah, it's the thing that comes up for me in 12-step programs, they call it GOD, the gift of desperation. It's almost like I don't even need any cookies or congrats for writing about it in a way because I was just desperate. Like I had nothing left. I had no my hope was gone of that things were gonna turn around because they just kept getting pummeled. And I don't wanna say getting pummeled as if I had no control. I watched friends whose businesses did just fine during that time period, and I'm sure there was so much I could have done differently. At the same time, I was absolutely exhausted. My husband's from Lebanon, a country where is this huge, like nuclear sized explosion. There was war. There was revolution. There still is war. His parents live in Beirut. It's being bombed. Like there were many other stressful things.
Of course.
And my energy was so maxed. Just they call it your surge capacity. Mine was totally spent. I didn't have the energy to keep trying. And so it was the first time I'd felt in over a decade of self-employment that like my sort of hope and optimism and resourcefulness was gone. Like they just weren't working. So in a way, the gift of desperation was there was nothing left to do. I even stopped reading business books and I unsubscribed from all business podcasts. I used to really love both because I'm like, you've done nothing for me. That's a lie, but they helped me a lot, but they weren't getting me through this phase, and they were making me angry. It was like, I've tried all that. I've done all the things. Clearly, there's something else happening. And of course, I do believe that there's, like, for me, there is something bigger at work. And I can see how this great humbling period shaped me and shaped my character. And I thought I was humble before. I'm way even definitely humbled now. It kind of brought me to my knees. It showed me another side of the business and financial experience of just like how low and how desperate it can feel, how hopeless, how helpless. Like, okay, picked up some new apps for my or tools for my toolkit. I'm so bad at mixing all my metaphors around. Can't stay put. But yeah, it's like I see how maybe it really was. It's so cliche in the moment, and I never want to. It's like you don't want to hear any of those stupid platitudes, but I do see how okay, maybe this is shaping me for what was to come, and that's still unfolding as we speak.
Absolutely. But when you're in that moment, especially with so many external, your husband's family, just everything going on, I think something that comes up a lot in these conversations is around allowing yourself and giving yourself grace. Like you had been hit hard, and it's okay. It's okay to feel that anger and that frustration, and to get rid of the newsletters that weren't helping or bringing you joy. And I think for anyone listening, there are going to be hard times, and it's okay to step away from things that no longer serve you in the moment. Um, but when you're out of it and when you're reflecting, it's like, okay, now I see. Maybe it was really hard in the moment, but I'm potentially stronger for it on the other side.
Yeah, and then, like, your show wouldn't exist without having gone through that, and then you also feeling compelled, like, "Hey, that maybe there's something missing from this conversation," and now in hero's journey language, you get the boon from going through your hero's journey or Shiro's journey. You get this boon that you now get to bring back and keep shedding light on these kind of darker feeling topics or the ones that we might shy away from.
Absolutely. No, it's hard. It's hard to see the good. It's hard to see the opportunity or, what might come out of it in the moment, but you're absolutely right. It certainly every experience of grief or pivot or transition certainly changes you. And so, we've talked a lot about reinvention. You've been through several iterations of it as a business owner, speaker, navigating through really lots of things that are outside of your control. And so, what do you think most people misunderstand about reinvention? Um, what do they think it might have to look like that, may not actually be the case?
Oh, I love this question, and I could probably think on this for the next 2 weeks. In fact, I'm giving a talk in 6 months, and the theme is reinvention. And I'm like, "What can I say on reinvention? Like, what would I say that's different now after my sort of pandemic pivots than I would have when the book Pivot came out in 2016?" I think when the book came out, I would have had a lot sunnier view of the idea of reinvention. It would have occurred to me that, like, "Oh, we choose to reinvent, you know? It's really exciting." It's like we go in for a makeover or a spa day and we go buy, we like revamp our wardrobe. And um, now in this moment, it occurs to me that so much of reinvention is life like knocking us on our ass,
Hmm.
like kind of getting rocked. And the old strategies are no longer working. I would say on a soul level, our soul is now sort of ready for its next phase of growth. And that looks very different than even the sort of ego level of identity, what it might want. Like, oh, I want the shiny, fancy job, house, car, kids, purse, clothes, shoes, whatever. But the soul's journey is different. Like the soul's journey is grittier, but
Yep.
realer. And in a way, reinvention is shedding the old identity, I think, by necessity because it's no longer working. It's no longer serving. Maybe we're burnt out, broken down, just at our wits' end. And then reinvention is required. Like reinvention is the only way through. And um, to quote a cliche business book, what got us here won't get us there. And I've
So
done a
true.
lot of reading. I'm only 42. Yeah. 42 and a half. To quote my inner 2-year-old, 42 and a half. But I did a ton of reading on midlife crisis in the last few years. And a lot of the books talk about the second mountain, the second phase, the second half of life, where we grow into different, deeper, more spiritual values than the achievement focus of the first half of our lives. And it's almost like the phases aren't, one is not wrong. The achievement focus establishes a certain foundation, but when that foundation is set, then it's almost like I think of these crisis moments as a big earthquake. Um, and it just forces us to strip away the superficial so we can build
Hmm.
something sturdy that's going to last in the next phase that simply can't be based on youth and agility and identity. Like, we want to have a positive view on aging, but at the same time, um, maybe we have more constraints and more complexity in our life too as we enter that middle passage. So yeah, I feel like reinvention is gnarly. It's really gnarly. And I wish I had a neat and tidy process for it, but I think that it does ask us to really, really, really say no to what's not working, to let it go, to grieve what we have lost. And it- I feel like for me, what's coming to mind is like I didn't even do it consciously, but things just got removed until I was left with the essence of who I am or what my talents are or how I can serve. And there's a Taoist saying, nature doesn't rush a flower. I could not rush my reinvention. It definitely has not occurred on my desired timeline whatsoever. I went into credit card debt. It's not like I didn't just reinvent right on time so I could keep paying the bills. There were consequences in my life. I'm still working through them. And so the reinvention also requires tremendous patience.
Hmm.
And in my case, I didn't start getting really passionate and energized about the main parts of my business again until a few months ago when the AI conversation evolved to include agentic AI. And we won't get into all those nitty gritty details here on this podcast. But in a way, like the market finally caught up with my interests, but I couldn't have forced it 6 months prior. It wasn't there. There wasn't that alignment. And now there is. And now I feel a surge of energy again. And now I feel like I'm really plugged into something and I'm back in builder mode. And I love geeking out on new technology. And those have been through lines since I was a kid, but I couldn't force the timing of them. This had to be patient and persistent as the reinvention sort of does its slow work. And the last thing I'll say on this is another thing they'll say in 12-step programs, which have been very helpful for me. Um, we wish you a slow recovery. They
Ooh,
don't want you coming in and getting like manically high on all the tools and program and community and then like burning out or being a flash in the pan. And so I remember that too. It's sort of counterintuitive, but it's like maybe we wish you a slow reinvention so that you really take your time with it and it doesn't slow, steady work on your spirit and your soul.
I love that. I think that's something too, again, just looking at society holistically, is we are so accustomed to Amazon overnight delivery or, instant gratification, but this whole concept of rebuilding and the second mountain, it takes time. And with your example, your interest and society weren't aligned at the right time, but I'm assuming it gave you a chance to really reflect to say, okay, what is it that I want? And you can't rush that. And now you're stronger, you're better, you're more positioned and in tune with your soul and what makes you happy.
And I've often said from the stage, what you want to do may not exist yet. That's something I've said for years,
Oh, I
talking
love
about
that.
pivots in progress. And that I say to everyone, and this I have said since the early days, nobody solves their pivot up front. You don't go into the process already having the answers. Otherwise, like you would just be doing it. You wouldn't even be aware you were at a pivot point. You would be part of the continuous pivot that's always happening.
Yep.
But when there is a bigger life quake, as Bruce Feiler calls it, you cannot solve it up front. The only way is by in the pivot method I talk about, you double down on what's working and what success looks like. So your strengths and your vision. Then you scan for related people, skills, and projects. And then you set up a few resonant pilots or experiments. And you don't know which pilot is going to work. They take on a natural momentum of their own. And so the pilot process is really helpful because that's where you start playing around and experimenting and not just sitting still, because being stagnant can be really dejecting.
Yeah.
And then in the pilot process, serendipities spark, you meet just the right person. A project does take off. Like for me, when I recently created an intro to agentic AI for solopreneurs, it was a free workshop. It was the fastest enrollment I've ever had in 15 years of anything in my business. The fastest enrollment, over 160 people signed up. Yeah, it was free. And I have to say, on the other side, didn't actually lead to any purchases in my business, but that was the clearest signal I had had. Um, Yet of anything I've ever done. It was so remarkable, but I wouldn't have known it up front. I've been leading all kinds of workshops left and right. You just don't know till you're in it. So I think part of it is also just continuing to put one foot in front of the other, knowing you won't have the capital A answer. You're just looking for small clues along the path.
Oh, I love that. I think it's important to reiterate that it's you don't again, to your point, you don't go in knowing the answer. You have to see what sticks, what sparks your interest, and, and your line of what you may wanna do may not exist yet is and always important to keep in the back of your mind as things start to progress.
And I think that's definitely true. We're in a very unique era right now. It's nerve-wracking. Some people love AI, some people hate it. AI is a big umbrella. There's a lot underneath it, but there's no doubt that it's changing a lot, and it's going to change a lot of how a lot of people work, and some for better, some for worse. But it's just we are in a very fascinating era. As a elder millennial, I could say I was around when there were, not really computers in the home, and then we got computers. I was around
Yep.
before the internet, and then I was around once we started booting up with AOL floppy disks and hearing the screechy modem. And I was around before social media and after. And I do think we're in an era that's as monumental of a shift of just where AI is going to take things. I feel it. And there are exciting ways to kind of apply and learn and grow within it. Of course, there's the downsides too. But um, I think now one way to sort of counteract the anxiety of what will become of my job, my industry, is to just dedicate time to learning and playing around with all of it.
Absolutely. And as a fellow elder millennial, I think we're best positioned to embrace this change because we have been through it before. And my kids can't believe I was alive before Google. So it's always fun to throw that little fact out. Uh,
Totally.
So Jenny, as we close, how can people find out about you and your work, and how can they connect in with you?
You can visit jennyblake.nyc. That's kind of my umbrella website that will point you to all the places. If you like listening to podcasts, mine are paused at the moment, but I have over 750 episodes. Just look up
Wow.
Pivot with Jenny Blake or Free Time with Jenny Blake. And last but not least, you can find me on Substack. So you could go to substack.com/at Jenny Blake, and you'll see all three of my newsletters: Pivot, Free Time, and Rolling in Dough.
Amazing. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for your time. And if something stuck with me is that, transition and change is not always easy and it's not always visible, but it's about listening to those small signals. And that's what you gave us today. Not a formula, not a five-step plan, but permission to look for and take those signals seriously. To trust that becoming doesn't have to mean destroying, and that the most important transition you'll ever make might be the one happening quietly inside you right now. So, for anyone listening, if this episode moves something in you, I hope you'll let it, sit with it, write something down, take one small step towards something you've been circling. And I'd encourage you to find Jenny at her website, and her book Pivot is available wherever books are sold. I'll include all of her information to her work, her podcast, and all the resources she mentioned today in the show notes. And so if this episode resonated, please share it with someone who's in the middle of their own becoming. That's the best thing you can do for the show and also for the people you love. So, Jenny, thank you for being here. Thank you for showing us what it looks like to trust the process, even when things look uncertain. And to everyone else, please take care of yourself and keep becoming who you're meant to be.